Thank you for joining us for this special edition of KPBS News. I'm Maya Trabulsi. Even though much of the attention this week was focused on the mob attack at the U.S. Capitol, the ongoing crisis of the COVID-19 pandemic hasn't slowed down. In fact, this was one of the worst weeks yet. The number of deaths this week alone is well over 100. Since March, more than 1,700 people have died in San Diego County, with a substantial number of those coming in recent weeks. At the national level, Johns Hopkins University reported more than 4,000 daily U.S. deaths for the first time on Thursday. Vaccines have arrived, but the rollout is a challenge. The state is now allowing dentists to give shots to prioritized groups. KPBS health reporter Taryn Mento says it's an effort to get the vaccines out as soon as possible.
Nearly 200,000 vaccine doses made their way to San Diego County facilities, but vaccinators have only administered about 47,000. Dr. Rodney Hood is a San Diego physician who sits on state and county vaccine advisory groups. He says the challenge is not all facilities that need the vaccine have the capacity to store it.
And even if you're able to store it, you need to be able to deliver it with PPE and expertise to staff to be able to vaccinate.
He says the county is launching regional vaccination sites, or pods, to make it easier for prioritized groups to access a vaccination.
It's easier to have strategic pods rather than trying to get it to the small practices because of the storage issues.
The local advisory group that Hood helps chair is meeting to discuss vaccinations for critical workers, older adults, and those with medical conditions. But there are still many more vaccinations to be done before we reach those populations. The schedule right now prioritizes those in healthcare or long-term care facilities. Taryn Mento, KPBS News.
It's been a 9-month balancing act between ensuring public health and making sure small businesses stay afloat. Max Rivlin-Nadler tells us how the state is providing $500 million in grants to business owners.
The grant program launched late last week, right before the holiday, in an effort to make sure the online application system was ready to handle the heavy demand once business owners returned in the new year. The money, part of the federal stimulus that was handed to the state, will reach small businesses struggling through the pandemic, offering them grants between $5,000 and $25,000, depending on their size. These grants don't have to be paid back.
I know how incredibly difficult COVID-19 has been on our small business community. Businesses who did nothing wrong. You went into the personal care business or the hair barbershop, salon business, or restaurant business. A year ago, we never would have contemplated a situation.
Originally, the deadline for business owners was this Friday, but sensing the tight deadline, state officials moved the date back to Wednesday, January 13th. Unlike other pandemic relief programs, this one isn't first come, first serve, meaning no applications will be reviewed until January 14th. The San Diego and Imperial Small Business Development Center has developed a series of webinars and is offering to help walk small business owners and nonprofits through the application process.
This is an opportunity for small businesses and nonprofits to be able to get a little bit of relief, and the state of California is here to be able to support them.
These grants could be some help for small business owners in City Heights, like Pedro Fernandez, who owns Vallarta Taco Shop with his wife. Business has been nearly non-existent, while he closely adheres to the county's safety protocols. He says his business has been blocked from other support programs because his family took over the business just this past June, after the previous owner ran out of money at the beginning of the pandemic.
And in order to claim any help from the county, you have to have filed taxes before under this business. So we're not eligible for it. We just have to ride the wave. Yeah, we're not eligible for any help because we haven't owned this business for more than a year.
The state program comes with a similar requirement, that the business operates since June 2019. So it's possible the taco shop will be locked out from help once again. Businesses and nonprofits can sign up for the program through an online portal at careliefgrant.com. Max Rivlin-Nadler, KPBS News.
Most companies have complied with COVID-19 restrictions, even if it hurts their bottom line. But in North County, one city is trying to find a way to enforce the rules against those who ignore them. KPBS reporter John Carroll has more from Carlsbad.
Ever since the state stay-at-home order went into effect on December 5th, some restaurants in the county have chosen to defy it and stay open, at least for outdoor dining. In Carlsbad, a handful of restaurants have shown where they stand by keeping their doors open and putting signs up. Michael Curran represents a couple hundred restaurants, gyms, and salons across the county, including in Carlsbad. He says staying open is not an act of defiance, rather just peaceful protest. And he says up until now, Carlsbad police have been handling those protests the right way.
Carlsbad police have pretty much come in and said, well, you're aware of these orders. You're supposed to be following them, but we see that you're not. We see that you're in the midst of a peaceful protest. Here's a box of masks. Have a nice day.
But that could now change. Up until now, the Carlsbad City Council had just 4 members on it, and when they last voted on enforcing public health regulations, it was a tie. But now there's a 5th member on the council. Councilmember Corey Schumacher called for today's special meeting.
This is really about getting to a point where with a 5-member council, we can give very clear direction on what we expect out of our staff and what we expect from our community members when it comes to taking care of each other during a public health crisis.
If emails to the council are any indication, Schumacher and her colleagues could face some stiff opposition to stricter enforcement. Please don't run us out of Carlsbad. We rely on these restaurants to keep us sane. We will all just go to Encinitas or Oceanside to dine if you shut them down. From another, I really don't want giant corporations to own everything in Carlsbad or SoCal. Please support allowing restaurants to remain open and allowed to have outdoor dining. There is nothing scientific that says eating outside and following the guidelines spreads COVID. But there was also support for increased enforcement. Please fulfill your duty and enforce state and county health orders regarding closure of businesses and limiting restaurants to takeout only. Our health depends upon it, especially with the new COVID variant surfacing in our county. Councilwoman Schumacher says there have already been 28 cease and desist orders issued by the county in her district alone. If stricter enforcement is approved, fines could range from $100 to $500 per violation. John Carroll, KPBS News.
San Diego's public schools expect to get some of the $54 billion set aside for education in the latest COVID-19 relief package. Overall, local school districts will get nearly $400 million. About 1/3 of that will go to San Diego Unified. The vice president of the school board, Richard Barrera, says it will be a good first step. He says the money will be needed to address long-term effects of the pandemic and possible solutions like an extended summer school to get students caught up. The money will also help avoid staff layoffs. And San Diego Unified is joining other large districts in saying the governor's plan to reopen elementary schools will hurt California's neediest students. KPBS education reporter Joe Hong explains why these districts want to slow down reopenings.
In a letter on Wednesday, 7 of the state's large urban school districts sent a detailed letter to Governor Gavin Newsom's office, criticizing his recently announced plan to encourage elementary school reopenings across the state. Under Newsom's Safe Schools for All plan, a district can receive up to millions in additional funding if it's able to begin in-person instruction at elementary schools. But only districts and counties with a 7-day average of fewer than 28 COVID-19 cases per 100,000 residents qualify for this funding. San Diego Unified School District Superintendent Cindy Martin was among the officials who signed the letter to the governor, arguing that districts in affluent areas with lower case rates will be able to open first and take advantage of the extra state funding.
Our tax dollars are going to go to the parts of the state that need it the least, and that's not good.
Martin said the governor's plan also lacks details on how to regularly test students for COVID-19 once they return to campus.
You got to start with testing so that we can operate safely. And his plan is not clear on that. And we need this gradual reopening. And the plan to get students back should focus first on public health.
John Affelt is the Education Equity Director at Public Advocates, a Bay Area-based civil rights law firm. He praised the governor's efforts to reopen schools.
I think the governor deserves credit for pushing this conversation. not giving up on this year, but trying to figure out a way to incentivize schools to reopen.
But Affeldt said he understands the concerns of Martin and the other superintendents. He says the solution is to allow districts in areas with low case counts to reopen while providing additional support to those in areas with high case counts.
How do we do both things at the same time? Open as many schools as we can and make sure that we're giving extra attention to the communities that are hardest hit so that we can give those schools the best chance to reopen as quickly as possible also.
The Safe Schools for All plan needs to be approved by the state legislature, and schools would start reopening on February 15th. Joe Hong, KPBS News.
UC San Diego started its winter term this week with some classes being held outdoors. Several teaching tents are set up around campus. Masks must be worn and class sizes are capped. Also new for the winter quarter, free COVID-19 test kits in 11 vending machines scattered across campus. Students and staff can send the kits off for processing and get results in about 2 days.
Vending machines made more accessible, and especially like if you have something to do and it's like you have like 5 minutes to go do something, like come right here and get it.
The school is now requiring students to get tested each week, and they must complete an online screening each day. The pandemic has highlighted the disparities in access to health care, especially when it comes to a person's race. KPBS health reporter Taryn Mento tells us about a new effort to right some historic wrongs.
County data shows Hispanic, Black, and Pacific Islander residents are hit harder by the coronavirus. But new supervisor Nora Vargas says COVID-19 isn't the only pandemic.
And we must also collectively recognize and address that the pandemic of systemic racism is in San Diego County and in our nation.
Vargas and Supervisor Nathan Fletcher were joined by community leaders to declare racism a public health crisis. Tribal chairwoman of the Manzanita Band of the Kumeyaay Nation, Angela Elliott Santos, explains how the past unjust practices against the local indigenous community created poor health outcomes.
Today, diabetes runs rampant on our reservations. After having been free and proud, we were pinned up on land that wouldn't sustain one family out in the mountains, 4,200 feet up at Manzanita. So we see the lasting effects.
Vargas says a measure will go before the Board of Supervisors next Tuesday to help address past discriminatory policies. It directs staff to collect community input on existing county policies, better use data to identify gaps in programming, and incorporate an equity impact statement for any future recommendations before the board.
We're establishing a commitment to disrupt and dismantle oppressive systems, and we take the necessary steps to make sure that we remove barriers that prevent diversity and equity and inclusion.
If approved, staff would return in 90 days with a framework to move forward. Taryn Mento, KPBS News.
Arts organizations have been hit hard by the pandemic. As KPBS arts reporter Beth Accomando tells us, San Diego Opera discovered that lessons it learned from an earlier financial crisis have proven useful during these current challenging times.
Back in March, San Diego Opera was planning to stage The Aging Magician featuring the Brooklyn Youth Chorus. Then COVID-19 hit, preventing the children from traveling.
We were the first opera company in the United States to have to postpone or cancel performances due to COVID. So it hit us very early in March, and then we had to postpone the rest of our season. And so since then, all we have done is think about being nimble and pivoting and trying to find ways and explore ways to produce opera that can guarantee safety.
David Bennett took on the role of San Diego Opera's general director back in 2015, amidst fears of closure. Little did he realize that the response to those financial challenges and what the company learned from it would be helpful during this current pandemic.
As a result of the near closure, we wrote new core value, mission, vision statements. And one of the core values that came about at that point was, through nimble adaptation to the changing marketplace, we preserve the future of San Diego Opera. Now, that was really in response to, I think, a financial changing marketplace, right? The fact that we almost closed. But boy, there is not truer words that could be spoken about where we're living right now as a company, right?
The opera has proven extremely nimble and adaptable. Back in October, it built an outdoor stage in the sports arena parking lot, so it could be one of the first opera companies in the U.S. to return to live performances. It produced an innovative drive-in version of La Bohème.
One of the protocols that they established was for an outdoor performance, which we did, each singer had to have 120 square feet of their own space, and you couldn't encroach in the space of another singer. So that was a challenge, and that was defined by 15 feet in front of your mouth and the next singer, and then 4 feet on the side. So of course, if the singer turned, then you had to increase that space of 15 feet. That was a challenge. So we had to come up with some creative solutions to make sure we told the story of La Bohème within the constraints of safety.
Restrictions on what kind of performances San Diego Opera can do means they cannot generate the same income from ticket sales as they used to in the massive Civic Theater. But even that has led to some new opportunities.
But what we did find was that we had some new sponsorship opportunities that came to us because that we were doing something outdoors that really reached the whole community in a way that it didn't if we did it at the Civic Theater.
So far, San Diego Opera has not had to lay off any staff thanks to the nimbleness it learned from its earlier financial crisis. Now a pandemic is challenging the company and demanding new innovations that in turn can be used after life returns to normal, like taking advantage of San Diego's climate to perform outdoors.
So that's our first sort of big learning experiment, I would say. So I think that will be something we'll continue to look at post-COVID. So challenges can give you a lot of opportunities, let's put it that way.
But Bennett knows 2021 will be a challenging year.
But how long you can be an opera company that's not producing opera and still stay in business is the big challenge. So, we've been very lucky because we haven't had to furlough or lay anyone off. We did receive the PPP funds that came through during the summer, which helped us retain employees, but we've still been in a situation that we haven't had to do that, which has been terrific.
Bennett and San Diego Opera are ready for whatever challenges the new year poses, and they look forward to when they can stage live opera without restrictions, so they can bring shows like The Aging Magician to a theater where it belongs. Beth Accomando, KPBS News.
Finding an audience isn't easy these days for those who need that outlet to perform. KPBS reporter John Carroll talked to one San Diegan who's had to find answers for local arts organizations.
Ruben Valenzuela is in familiar surroundings. In the strangest of times.
As the months progressed, it became even more clear that this was a long haul.
Valenzuela has played the organ here at All Souls Episcopal Church in Point Loma thousands of times, but now he plays to an empty church with only microphones listening. Valenzuela is the director of music and the organist here.
What's been taken away is the very thing that we're usually doing, that is performing.
So, like many churches all over the world, he moved the music, organ and choir, into the virtual space. He calls those early online days the Jurassic period. But over time, with safety in mind, changes were made. The end product got better.
Things started to kind of refine themselves. Okay, we can get some people in here in the building, which gives us a proper acoustic, which means that we can use the organ, which means that, okay, I think we could, the product would be better if we had lights, so somebody donated lights. And little by little, the church became essentially a recording studio for the week-to-week church.
Valenzuela's musical world stretches beyond the sacred. He is also choral conductor for the La Jolla Symphony Chorus. The group is made up entirely of volunteers, so along with moving performances online, Valenzuela had to think about how to keep the group engaged.
We have some time. Let's stop now and look at X, Y, and Z in depth. We can't sing it, but we can talk about it. We can look under the surface. We can look at the history, the context. And so there's been a lot of occasion for that.
In addition to his duties at All Souls and the La Jolla Symphony Chorus, Valenzuela is also artistic director of the Bach Collegium. He founded the group in 2003. The pandemic presented him with very different challenges than the other groups.
What are we going to do next? We have concerts planned. They got pulled, they got canceled, people paid for things. What are we going to do?
Somehow, Valenzuela has made it all work. He's done it by being innovative, thinking outside the box. Call them changes forced by the pandemic, new ways of doing things that Valenzuela says won't entirely disappear once the pandemic is over.
It would be a huge mistake to just turn your back on all that's been learned in this year whenever this ends, because there are some valuable tools. I mean, you need to have at your fingertips the ability to reach out to your constituents, whether they're your congregation, whether you're ticket buyers, supporters, donors, when you can't do a live performance.
Now, with vaccines being distributed, Valenzuela is looking toward the future, and he admits to some anxiety.
I find myself looking at things on TV or on YouTube, and I see, pre-pandemic footage, and I cringe because I think we've gotten used to now seeing people distanced, people with masks, and certainly in the music arena. So I think that trigger will be there for quite some time, and I wonder how much of that distancing aspect will linger for even longer than we think.
Even in a virtual way, the arts have helped a lot of us get through these dark days. Now that the end of the COVID era is hopefully coming into view, we're all left to wonder, what form will the arts take in a world finally free of the ravages of a once-in-a-century pandemic? John Carroll, KPBS News.
Kevin Faulconer hasn't been shy about criticizing Governor Newsom's handling of COVID-19, and now it turns out that might be a springboard for the former mayor's future plans. KPBS Metro reporter Andrew Bowen explains.
The odds are automatically stacked against Faulconer, but Faulconer sees opportunity in a budding effort to recall Governor Gavin Newsom.
Californians are hurting, and particularly during this pandemic, where we have approximately 500,000 Californians that cannot receive their unemployment checks. That's why I think you're seeing this growing, not only anger, frustration, but resolve that says we need a change at the top.
The recall campaign gives Faulconer a familiar, if unlikely, pathway to victory. Wait for a scandal to oust the incumbent, then win in a low-turnout special election. UCSD political science professor Thad Kauser says that's how Faulconer was elected mayor in 2014.
If turnout is lower in a recall that's held in an odd year, in an odd month, then you might have a more Republican slanted electorate, or at least one where it wouldn't be as blue as most most electorates are in California.
Kauser adds Faulconer faces a tricky balancing act with President Trump, who, despite losing the November election, is still the dominant player in the Republican Party. Trump's brand is toxic in California, and Faulconer has always tried to paint himself a moderate, supporting immigration reform and action on climate change.
Those have made him different than Donald Trump, but he can't reject Trumpism and still expect the Republican base to turn out for him if he wants to advance in California politics.
Beyond being a Republican with some name recognition, Faulconer doesn't have much to run on, according to Gil Cabrera, an attorney who's served on several city boards and commissions. He says Faulconer mostly avoided major scandals.
But we also had, budget deficits during a growing economy. I mean, it's all the things that a Republican would normally run on. I don't know that he would be able to.
The Recall Newsom campaign has 2.5 months to gather the 1.5 million valid signatures needed to force a special election. Andrew Bowen, KPBS News.
A new law will provide emergency aid for homeless vets during the pandemic. KPBS military reporter Steve Walsh says more veterans have now died from COVID than died in combat during the last two wars.
The new law would temporarily loosen up rules for providing services and outreach to homeless veterans, including raising the amount the VA could pay landlords in places like pricey San Diego. Congressman Mike Levin is one of the bill's sponsors.
The monthly rent payments has not been adequate for a community like ours. We know that roughly a quarter of those BASH vouchers are going unused.
Those homeless vouchers were going unused in San Diego even before the pandemic. Price is one of the issues. Lack of outreach is another, Levin says.
They can choose to provide services that they could not before. They will have a lot more flexibility in terms of being able to even look at things like temporary housing of homeless veterans.
The new law comes as the VA says 6,772 patients have died from COVID-19, more than the number of troops who died in Iraq and Afghanistan combined. The recent defense bill also included language that would allow veterans with other than honorable discharges to qualify for homeless vouchers for the first time.
Post 9/11 veterans who have had addiction issues or are suffering from post-traumatic stress or TBI, and we have to be very mindful that these programs actually are designed to help the veterans who need the help, not just those who might check a box.
The legislation also requires the VA to study how to better serve the growing number of women veterans. Another provision would also expand services to help veterans get a job as they leave the service. Steve Walsh, KPBS News.
And that's all for this special edition of KPBS News. I'm Maya Trabulsi, and for all of us here at KPBS, thank you for joining us and stay safe.